Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth, not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast, hosted by Seth Andrews.
My special guest today has a delightful group of online commenters who absolutely adore him. Just a few gems, and I made these notes a few weeks ago. Someone said, "You know less than an idiot," and they could not spell "than" correctly. There's another one who was saying, "Sheeple, bah, narcissist, bah, take the vaccine, bah, go get another booster." And then there were sheep emojis. So, of course, he is one of the sheeple. And he is blasted left and right for everything from his, I guess, bogus scientific background to his man bun. How does this guy deal with it all? Dr. Jonathan Stea is a clinical psychologist and adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Calgary. He specializes in addictive and psychiatric disorders. He is a science and health communicator, and he has a new book called Mind the Science: Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry. Dr. Stea, it's good to have you, brother.
Thanks so much, Seth. I think that's the best intro I've ever had on one of these podcasts.
I'm a giver. I
appreciate that.
I love your work anyway, but the base part of me does enjoy watching how you respond to the haters. And they don't just disagree with you. These people think you're the devil. This is a daily, like an hour by hour occurrence.
Absolutely. They've named me the devil. They've called me the face of evil, the devil's representative. Just using a lot of that mythological language. And yeah, I mean, what you named was a sample of probably what I've been dealing with the past 2 years or so, a bit longer than that. But I'd say in the last 2 years, and especially since Elon Musk took over Twitter, now X, I literally receive about, on average, 100 of those hateful, abusive messages a day. I'm not exaggerating the number, probably across social media platforms, but most specifically on X. So yeah, I'm well practiced at kind of managing that kind of vitriol.
Why the outrage? I mean, why are people so jacked up over you and what you're saying? They're being personally attacked. That's kind of how they're acting.
Yeah, maybe it is the man bun and sort of the devil horn that come out.
Well, they say normally when you resort to personal insults, you've kind of already lost the discussion. So
absolutely. I've actually written on kind of the psychology on trolling and the psychology of harassment. So there's actually a number of factors that come together and interact that I think kind of produces this. So number one, I'd say obviously the vast majority of these folks, 99% of them don't know who I am, or I certainly don't know who they are. So they're attacking an image of who they think I am or an idea that I represent. So number one, that's sort of happening. But when you look at the literature on the psychology of trolling, you see that it's sort of a number of these factors. And I find it helpful for me to understand that we can categorize them as sort of internal factors and external factors. So things inside of us and outside of us. So the things outside of us are things like the online disinhibition effect. So just the idea that anyone behind a computer screen somehow gets all of that liquid courage that, something like alcohol may provide, because it sort of creates this illusion or this veil of invincibility that's really an illusion. So there's this online disinhibition effect. I think when someone's anonymous, that kind of puts the online disinhibition effect on steroids, that kind of amplifies it. And of course, there's just so much tribalism kind of going on. So I kind of consider that to be an external factor. Those things are interacting with other what I call internal factors or things inside of us. So we know from the scientific literature that there's a number of personality traits that make people more likely to engage in trolling and harassment. And the psychology world calls these things the dark triad or the dark tetrad. So specifically things like narcissism or sadism. And so when someone scores high in these personality traits, they tend to go after people. I think what accounts for a lot of my hate is that there's another kind of factor, which is what I call these ideologically possessed beliefs. So in other words, marriage to a kind of ideology or pseudoscience. So, a lot of my work is calling out things like the anti-vaccine movement or pseudoscience in alternative medicine and the wellness industry. And I think that people can get very threatened by that because when they tie their personal identity to those beliefs, they can feel attacked. And then if they already have personality traits like narcissism or sadism and this marriage to pseudoscience, say, I think that's sort of the perfect storm for this stuff. And then, of course, there's other psychological things happening, like people get conditioned by it. If you do it a lot, repeatedly, and you happen to have this sadistic tendency or narcissistic tendency, the brain gets rewarded over time by trolling and harassing people. So people kind of develop this habit and hobby of doing it. So I just happen to see them frequently. But I think that explains it, this combination of things.
It's like, the anti-vax or flat earth crowd or whatever. The more attacked they are, the more persecuted they are, then the more they are essentially like David versus Goliath. And then fight or flight kicks in, right? And they often retreat back to a pod where they are validated by like-minded people and they all pat each other on the back and say, wow, good thing we're smarter than everybody else. I call them identity beliefs. Was that a good term for it?
I like that term. Yeah, I think that's really well said. And yeah, it plays into this kind of hero mythology that they're playing into. Like you said, they go out into the world, they're a martyr or a hero, and then they get to go back to the community and be praised for that, even though it's sort of, reality is much more sobering.
Which segues me into the title of your book, Mind the Science, Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry. Dr. Stea, that book title is just the kind of thing I'd expect a big pharma shill to say. You're taking your shillionaire bucks, you're in the pocket of the big drug companies, and that's why you should be distrusted at all costs. You've heard this one?
Every day. Absolutely. And it's greatly ironic too, because I'm a clinical psychologist. And so the vast majority of clinical psychologists don't actually prescribe medication. I don't have prescribing authority. So it's hilarious when people call me a big pharma shill because big pharma doesn't care about me at all. I don't prescribe drugs. I can't make them money.
Okay. Well, it doesn't fit in a box, but I rely on pharmaceutical companies. We all do, or most of us do, for science-based solutions. But it's also, I think, crazy that Pfizer has a market value of $170 billion, while some people are forced to pay $1,000 a month for diabetes medication. And so it's easy for us to distrust these major pharmaceutical companies because they do seem to be holding so many of the cards. How would you approach big pharma from that perspective?
I would agree. I think that we need to be skeptical of big pharma and conflicts of interest in science. And the distrust and the mistrust towards big pharma has been well earned because of their history. And so that is true. A case that I make in my book, however, is that we also have a $5.6 trillion wellness industry that is largely unregulated for safety and effectiveness. So big pharma, yes, it does have a lot of well-earned perils. To its credit, it at least tries to be regulated for safety and effectiveness, unlike the wellness industry. And so it sort of goes to another huge, message of my book is that just because big pharma doesn't necessarily, we can't put all of our trust in big pharma. That doesn't mean that the wellness industry is now our knight in shining armor that's going to come to the rescue and somehow cure all of our health ailments.
Yeah, but that's the pitch. They're Robin Hood. They're circumventing the system. They're going up against the man. They're going to beat him at his own game kind of thing. And most people who are going to the apothecary shops for, shark cartilage and lawn clippings or whatever, they feel like that they've kind of stuck it to the system, when in truth, they're supporting an industry that is a massive moneymaker.
Seth, you nailed it, because a lot of people don't really see that idea. It's that, and again, I make the case, is that alternative medicine and the wellness industry more generally. But alternative medicine is not just a set of unsupported treatments or a set of pseudoscientific treatments like energy healing or homeopathy. It's more than that. It's an entire narrative and an ideology with its own set of ideas behind it, its own repeated tropes or repeated ideas and phrases, its own propaganda tactics to further sow that distrust in mainstream healthcare. It needs that narrative to succeed and to grift. And what I'm trying to do is trying to help people see that narrative for their own eyes. So for example, if they went to a local alternative medicine clinic by Googling it, they could see some of these tropes and see some of these ideas that get repeated. Well, things like, unlike mainstream mental health care, who they don't know what they're doing and they only mask the symptoms, we treat the root cause. We know how to cure your health. They don't. That's part of the narrative that I think people I think they're on autopilot and they don't necessarily see that.
I'm interested too in the massaging of the data or the lack of sourcing. My wife works in healthcare, and so these stories kind of filter back to me. Someone's diagnosed with cancer. They don't trust big pharma or big chemo or big radiation, I don't know, hospitals. And so they end up getting suckered in by these little coffee enema places down in freaking Tijuana. They go down and spend tens and tens of thousands of dollars for those treatments. And those places will often say, oh, we've got a major success rate. But few people have been able to track down any real numbers. I don't know. Do you talk at all about that kind of thing?
I do. I think that's part of the propaganda tactics is that, a lot of it's part of the marketing spiel of alternative medicine. So yeah, they'll pitch some number or some study, and it can be massaged, as you say, in a number of different ways. So number one, it could be taken grossly out of context, maybe derived from one animal study and using rats that doesn't extend or generalize to humans at all. That's one kind of scenario. Most often we see just a lot of anecdotal evidence or testimonials, which we know is a pseudo-scientific warning sign. So they'll say, it worked for Bob going to Tijuana. It's going to work for you. And you see testimonials plastered all over alternative medicine websites. So that's a propaganda tactic. The most insidious one, in my opinion, is there's an entire industry of pseudoscientific journals. So things like the Journal of Alternative Medicine or the Journal of Evidence-Based Alternative Medicine, or there's one called Explore. There's a number of these things out there, of these journals, which they look and feel like regular peer-reviewed scientific journals. They have a method section and introduction and results and findings. But what makes them pseudoscientific is that they're publishing on unequivocal pseudoscientific topics. So, for example, using prayer to treat cancer, or entertaining the idea that demonic possession is a causal factor in schizophrenia, or the idea that you can use a randomized controlled trial, and if you send positive vibes to water, it's going to make its ice crystals look more beautiful. These topics are scientifically absurd, but they're dressed up in science and published in pseudoscientific journals. And I think what grifters, alternative medicine practitioners can do is they can then point to those journals and say, look, whatever treatment, my pseudoscientific treatment is actually supported in these journals. I think that's a very insidious propaganda tactic. And it's insidious because it's hard for experts in their fields to identify such things. And so when we put the onus on the general public to be buyer beware when they're trying to shop for care, it's hard to be able to spot if a grifter is telling them my treatment works because of this study, how are they going to know how to analyze that study, or that it is published in a pseudoscientific journal? That's a science literacy skill, and it's a hard thing for the general public to navigate.
It's the same thing we see with evolution deniers. If you go and you type in evolution into a Google search engine, I think one of the results that comes up is evolutionnews.com or .org or whatever, which is an intelligent design site. But it's, it doesn't throw religious terms out there, and it's loaded with scientific jargon. The layperson might look at that and go, wow, this is really impressive, incredible.
Exactly. It's the exact same tactic, and it's dangerous. And there's two parts to that. One is that, it happens on websites. Like I talk in the book about the Anti-Psychiatry Movement, and there's websites about that. And so one, for example, is called Mad in America. So they'll publish blogs and opinion pieces, and you have books basically that are evading peer review entirely, and people can get their opinions out there and pretend that it's science. So there's that aspect where there's these kinds of websites out there that will promote their treatments or their grift, so to speak. And then there's also these pseudoscientific journals, which are actually like published, and you can find them in data repositories like PubMed alongside other peer-reviewed scientific journals that are legitimate. And I think that's very dangerous as well, because people can't tell the difference between an article published in Nature or The Lancet, which is a top medical journal, and then something published in Explore, which is a garbage pseudoscientific journal.
I'm reminded of this claim or this idea that only idiots fall for this stuff. And I think of Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple. As I understand it, he was diagnosed with cancer, but at first he rejected science-based medicine, and he ended up doing a bunch of woo-y stuff, totally unproven wellness industry cures. And by the time he went back for science-based treatment, it was too late. But I guess let's talk about intelligence and deception.
With Steve Jobs, it's a very tragic case, and unfortunately not an uncommon one. People fall for misinformation. They fall for pseudoscience, and they fall for alternative medicine for, again, a variety of interacting reasons, even intelligent people. They do it all the time. There's a number of, again, reasons that people fall for it, both internally and externally. So there's reasons inside of us. There's a number of what we call individual variables. So how high does someone score on particular variables called conspiracy mentality, which is kind of our proclivity or our inclination to fall for conspiracies. There's personality traits like openness to experience, which is a dimension of our personality, which kind of speaks to how creative or how out of the box thinking a person is. People that score higher on these personality traits tend to, on average, also be more susceptible to misinformation. Reliance on intuitive thinking styles versus kind of sitting down and analyzing and using the analytic thinking styles to break down information. That leaves people more susceptible to misinformation. So there's that thing, that kind of set of ideas that's happening to us on an individual level that makes us more likely to fall for this. Then, of course, there's kind of broader, more group or social processes happening. So we're targeted by misinformation by, like we said, the wellness industry itself, whether it's particular influencers with huge Instagram platforms, or whether it's kind of more organized kinds of groups like the anti-vaccine movement and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Children's Health Defense, who are pitching ideas that vaccines cause autism and that, we need a detox from things like vaccines. So there's that level where people are likely to fall for misinformation generally. Then when we go back to someone like Steve Jobs, there's also reasons why people fall for alternative medicine kind of specifically, which are the same reasons that I mentioned, but there's a bit more. So for example, the fact that our mainstream mental health care systems are imperfect. We can't help everyone. So people are dissatisfied with mainstream mental health care, and for good reason, because we have gaps in our knowledge. We don't know how to treat everyone and everything. And there's gaps in our systemic healthcare systems. And then if we just ask people why they turn to alternative medicine, they'll tell us they feel like they're not being treated as a whole person, or that there's not a holistic approach to them, and they want to avoid the side effects of medications, and they want to avoid the profit-driven evils of big pharma. So again, there's a lot of good reasons why intelligent people do fall for misinformation in alternative medicine. And at the same time, just because we have these gaps in our knowledge and our treatments are imperfect doesn't mean that pseudoscientific treatments in alternative medicine in the wellness industry is the answer by exploiting people's financial vulnerabilities and emotional vulnerabilities.
There's an evil, I'm going to call it evil, documentary, anti-vax documentary released a few years ago, and it's still making waves out there. I'm going to talk to my guest about Died Suddenly coming up next. I'm speaking here with Dr. Jonathan Stea, clinical psychologist, educator, science communicator, and author of the new book, Mind the Science, Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry. Here's an insidious one. It was a couple of years ago. The anti-COVID vaccine propaganda film Died Suddenly was released. And the claim was that people who got the vaccine would just keel over. And they made a whole movie about it and released it and promoted the hell out of it. I can't remember the last time I've seen deception on that level. I mean, some of the people they said keeled over dead are still out there, like they're public figures. Did you get into died suddenly at all?
I certainly saw it. Yeah, was
the vein about to pop out of your forehead the whole time?
I had a lot of headache medication in hand. It was driving me bonkers and a lot of people bonkers, just because, like you said, there was so much explicit propaganda and just blatant lies. Like, people were caught in these lies. And that's what a lot of these anti-science movements do, whether it's the anti-vaccine movement or closer to my profession is the anti-psychiatry movement. They do a similar kind of propaganda takes.
What do you mean? I mean, let's get into that. There's a war on psychiatry. You talked about this in the book. Is it that they don't trust people with degrees in mental health?
That's part of it. It goes a bit deeper. So the anti-psychiatry movement it can trace its roots back to about the 1960s. And at that time, it was actually a good movement. It actually helped because it was pushing back against psychiatry's various missteps. So there was inappropriate pathologizing of minority groups. There was complaints about the arbitrariness of how we define and diagnose mental illness. There was inhumane treatment of patients in asylum cares and kind of psychiatric hospitals. And so there was this sort of movement pushing against these missteps. And so, it was pioneered by, I think the term anti-psychiatry was coined in 1967 by David Cooper. Thomas Sass he's a disgruntled psychiatrist, which is one of the founders of the anti-psychiatry movement. He was joined in his efforts by other self-identified disgruntled psychiatrists and other kind of journalists. So there's R.D. Laing. Michel Foucault was one of its intellectual pillars because they bring kind of this critical theory approach to it, which is critical theory is just sort of this philosophical orientation that everything's kind of, just to dub it down, everything's kind of subjective, and it really it wants us to use a lens of examining cultural assumptions and power dynamics. And so it really pushed back against the medical model as kind of having this power dynamic that was unhelpful for patients. So all that said, it had a good reason to develop this movement. What happened over time is that it worked. It actually helped psychiatry get its act together. Psychiatry moved patients out of these insane asylums, as they're called. They were moved into regular hospitals and into the community. Psychiatry got its act together kind of conceptually by focusing on more of what we call a biopsychosocial model of care. So meaning focusing on the interaction between biological factors, psychological factors, and social contributions to mental illness. And so by the 1980s or so, the anti-psychiatry movement had really greatly diminished because psychiatry learned from it as any rightful scientific discipline does. It learns and it grows from that. The problem is that the movement didn't die. It just sort of transformed and outlived its cause. And so now we see it. It's given breath by a few different lifelines, so to speak. So we see it online and on social media in various blogs and websites that are dedicated to flaming psychiatry in a way that dodges scientific critique. We see it on social media all the time by people sharing its various tropes or repeated ideas and phrases. People that are, mainstream influencers are sharing these ideas. For example, Elon Musk tweeting something like Adderall or SSRIs do more harm than good. Or Andrew Tate saying something like depression doesn't exist at all. These guys aren't part of the anti-psychiatry movement per se, but they're parroting these tropes that I don't even think they recognize. And so the anti-psychiatry movement is a pushback against psychiatry. It aims to tear down the discipline and deter treatment seeking because it doesn't believe in psychiatry as a whole. And it does vast harm to people by stigmatizing mental illness and stigmatizing psychiatric treatments. And one of the reasons that I talk about it in my book is because it's part of mental health misinformation more generally, but it's also a bedfellow with the wellness industry at large, because both kind of serve as a foil to mainstream medicine. Because as you were saying, both of them they share in the narrative that mainstream medicine is bad and the man is bad. And they take this sort of fringe alternative view, and they both play into that narrative. So psychiatry is bad. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to treat you. Come buy our supplements and take our detoxes and do our unnecessary protocols and testing. We can treat you. We know how to do it. And that's why, much like the alternative medicine industry is in bed with the anti-vaccine movement that has a long history, the same is the case with the anti-psychiatry movement. all of these fringe movements serve as a foil to the mainstream healthcare system at large.
I used to buy into the Elon Musk boy genius myth. And then he spoke. And all of those cards came down, just literally just. And I'm struck by the influencers that our culture has rewarded. Elon, Joe Rogan. Does he have the most popular podcast in the United States, at least? And the guy's got every crackpot known to man on the freaking show. And it just hurts my heart a little bit. So I don't know. Do you ever have that kind of despair? You know, the scientists, the Peter Hotezes of this world are fighting to be heard while we watch the Kardashians. You ever have that conversation?
Absolutely. I've had it with Peter Hotez, who's a friend of mine, and I feel so bad for him because he got chased. We were talking about harassment before, and this guy received so much harassment for championing public health and developing brand new vaccines without the influence of big pharma. So this guy just really, people were showing up at his house harassing him. And, you know, I'm getting hundreds of hateful messages a day. He's getting thousands. It's terrible that someone like him is being chastised in our culture. And like you said, not rewarded as someone like Andrew Tate or Elon Musk or just random wellness influencers on Instagram with millions of followers. It's disheartening on the one hand, and I'm pessimistic at that reality. And on the other hand, one of my missions and what I'm trying to really do is, as a clinical psychologist, I work on the individual level. So I'm not a policy analyst. I'm not a political scientist. I don't know the solutions at the social level, the broader level. What I'm trying to focus on is helping the individual protect themselves from all of the crap that is out there, so to speak, by trying to arm them with science literacy skills, trying to help them with mental health literacy skills, help them identify and learn the language of pseudoscience, learn the language of these wellness and alternative medicine narratives and anti-psychiatry narratives so that they can see it, be unable to unsee it, and better protect themselves. Because again, I don't think it's necessarily going anywhere. Pseudoscience and wellness grift has kind of always been with us, so to speak. And so I think it's actually getting worse with the advent of social media. But at least we can try to affect its demand by arming people on the ground level, so to speak.
So let's bounce around your book. What are some of the greatest or worst hits? Well, what's some of the craziest shit you have been seeing and hearing out there?
Wow, where do I start with that?
In a strong field, he begins. Yeah. And he starts.
Yeah. Good thing this is audio because you don't want to see me bashing my head against the wall right now. I would say that I think it's the anti-psychiatry tropes that drive me the most bonkers. And so what I mean by that is you will, like I mentioned earlier, Andrew Tate will flat out deny that depression exists. Or if you go on social media or in popular culture, you'll see absurd claims like schizophrenia doesn't exist, or mental illness more broadly doesn't even exist, or that all psychiatric medications don't work or that they're harmful. And these ideas, they're simply not true, and there's good reasons for that, but they also do tremendous damage. And what bothers me is they're so, again, insidious, or they permeate our culture to such an extent. I've seen it show up to our clinic. Like I work in a hospital setting where we specialize in treating people with what we call concurrent addiction and mental disorders. So people that have severe addiction and mental disorders. And so they'll come to our clinic and they've often had a history of treatment and it hasn't really worked. And so I work on a great interdisciplinary team with other psychologists and psychiatrists, social workers, and nurses, and we're trying to help folks. And they, through no fault of their own, on a patient level, they'll come and they'll say, well, I'm scared of medications because I read this online, or is bipolar really a thing? Does that exist? Or what is obsessive compulsive disorder? Is that a thing? I mean, I'm having these kinds of symptoms, but I'm hearing that doesn't exist at all. And it can really deter people and confuse the hell out of people. And so, I'm not battling misinformation in treatment sessions or in therapy sessions per se, but we do have to kind of correct those on some level. And one of the reasons I wrote the book in the first place was to try to put on a different role than I have as a clinician and try to battle this misinformation aimed at a different audience, a wide audience, so that I don't have to have people come to the clinic with these kinds of misinformed ideas about what mental illness means and kind of the nature of treatment. So to answer your question, it's the anti-psychiatry tropes that make me want to do unhelpful things.
Well, some of that I think links back to, was it 20 some years ago, there was a film called Prozac Nation. I think it may have been based on a book that was like, we're all just essentially treating symptoms with chemicals. I think it was a way of dismissing being able to treat people with mental illness using chemistry, addressing brain chemistry, etc. On a related note, by the way, and this takes me back to your comment section, speaking of things that don't exist, I was amused that someone said you could treat rabies with garlic juice, and then someone else jumped in, and whenever you had said, rabies thanks you for this declaration, they said, hey, can you just post any date where a proven case of rabies was recorded? So now we've got a rabies denier. Does rabies exist, Dr. Stea?
I'm no medical doctor, but I'm pretty sure it does. And what also exists is this whole idea of germ theory denialism, or denying that viruses exist, or denying that bacteria even exists. And it's a symptom of a larger problem. We have germ theory denialism. We have evolution denialism, as you said. We have mental illness denialism. All of these ideas, again, it's almost like whack-a-mole. You can have scientific consensus on a variety of topics, and you'll still get people denying that the earth isn't flat. And so we know a lot of the factors that contribute to people falling for these ideas. I think that, as science communicators, we know that debunking works at a population level, meaning when we debunk claims and we say that, no, the earth isn't flat and here's why, that helps on a population level, or on a level on average, because the audience of a science communicator is the general public. But when we're dealing with deniers, say, it's a much more of an uphill battle. It's not impossible. People have come back from self-identifying as conspiracy theorists and kind of buying into that stuff, but I think it's much more challenging.
That's interesting, because we tend to think they're unreachable. You're saying that we can go out and debunk the bunk, and it actually works.
Yeah, we have data for that at the population level. So Timothy Caulfield's a friend of mine, and he's a professor of health and law at the University of Alberta. He's been doing this work for decades on kind of misinformation and how can we prevent it or mitigate it and do the best we can with it. And there's a whole body of research that says that when we target the general public, we see shifts and that people can be less likely to fall for misinformation. That said, in an individual level, I think we know less about it. There's less of that literature. But yeah, we see these stories all the time. We see people coming back from it. It can happen. People can fall for QAnon, and they can, be flat earthers, and they can deny that germs exist, and they'll come back with a vengeance. We see a similar thing with, as you were saying, or even there's other people who have fallen for the wellness industry, say, and they were kind of in the wellness community. They were part of that culture. They were anti-big pharma. They were pro-natural, quote unquote, natural treatments. And I've met a lot of people in the space that is debunking wellness, where they've come back from that culture even.
It's possible to be rescued from bad ideas. I am living, breathing, walking, talking proof. But this leads me into natural good, synthetic bad, right? All Natural is a great brand. It's a great way to sell breakfast cereal and medicine and teas and tonics. Natural is always good. Synthetic is always bad. How do you approach that one?
It's a fallacy. It's the appeal to nature fallacy. It's one of the fallacies of which, again, alternative medicine uses as part of their narrative. I think it's one of the propaganda tactics. I list a whole bunch of these in my book that alternative medicine uses to kind of cajole audiences and kind of influence people. So yeah, the fact that something is quote unquote all natural. First of all, we have to define what does natural even mean. We're all made from chemicals. We're all made from how far back do we want to go, to the Big Bang? Like, everything is sort of natural. COVID-19 is natural. Rabies is natural. Viruses are natural. They're not necessarily good. So all that to say, it's a fallacy, but it's a powerful one because our brains are kind of wired to buy into these rhetorical tricks, so to speak. So it's an intuitive idea that I'd prefer a natural treatment than a man-made synthetic one, but it's a fallacy because it's erroneous. It logically doesn't make sense when we kind of break it down. And so I think that we want to encourage critical thinking. We want to encourage people to be aware of these kinds of logical fallacies so that they don't fall for misinformation. Another popular one is the appeal to tradition fallacy, right? This treatment has been used for thousands of years, therefore it's more effective. Well, do we really want to go back thousands of years and adopt the systems of medicine that were used then? Probably not.
Coming up with my guest, I want to talk about detoxing. I got toxins in my system. I got to get rid of those. Wait a minute. Is that a thing? I'm going to ask Dr. Jonathan Stea next. Speaking here with psychologist and author Dr. Jonathan Stea. There is a phenomenon known as the reiteration effect or the reiteration fallacy. I've heard it so long that it must be true. It's intuitive that it's true. I got into it recently with somebody about how MSG is not bad for you. I also took it in the teeth for saying that sugar does not make kids hyperactive. There's no scientific proof of that. It's just something we've always believed. And then there's detox. You wrote about this in your book. Are detox diets legit?
Detox is a scam. It's a wellness buzzword that is used to instill fear in our population. Fear meaning there's something bad in us, often heavy metals or toxins that are floating around in the environment, and that the wellness industry can gift us a product, a detox product that will get rid of those toxins that are causing X, Y, and Z, various health ailments, cancer, AIDS, mental illness, whatever it is. And whenever anyone, I would urge caution. If anyone is claiming that they have a detox product that they want to sell you, it's almost certainly a scam. It's a hijacked medical term, and we actually use it. I work in the addiction world, and detoxification centers are an actual thing. I mean, people have to detox from drug addiction like alcohol. If they've been drinking alcohol every day for copious amounts every day for a month, their body will withdraw from it, and you need a medically assisted detox to help with that. Same with other drugs of abuse or other substances of abuse. That's not what detox products are. It has nothing to do with that. Again, it's a hijacked notion, and it's a wellness industry buzz term that instills a lot of fear. And again, it's part of the narrative. If you go and Google a detox product, you'll see that narrative. You'll see that they say toxins are in the environment. They're hurting us. They don't specify what the toxins are, because if you ask them, they won't even be able to tell you, or they'll tell you a chemical or two. And then if you ask a further question, they won't be able to tell you why that's harmful. It's just part of the narrative.
Anything else in the book that you want to highlight real fast that, my listeners can then go take the deeper dive? The book is called Mind the Science, Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry. What else can we expect to see in there?
The overarching goal of the book is to help empower and embolden people to take their mental health into their own hands, because I think at the end of the day, everyone's mental health is precious. And I think that the reality is that mental health care is a very much caveat emptor, buyer beware. So we need to be mindful of how to improve our mental health and how to address mental disorders. So it's for anyone that's wanting to protect themselves from mental health scams. And it's for anyone that is curious about the link between science and mental health and science and mental disorders, and to increase their knowledge about science literacy skills and mental health literacy skills.
I will link to that book in the description box. And do you have a website, like a main website of your own where I can send people?
My main website is probably the best place to purchase the book, because it depends on location. If you're in Canada, you want to go to a particular link. And if you're in other parts of the world, you do want to go to a particular link. It's available on any major book retailer website, so you can Google it on Amazon. But my main website is my name, Jonathan Stea, JonathanStea.com.
I'll include that link as well. What is it with you freaking Canadians? I got you, I got Tim Caulfield, I got some of my fellow activists up there. How come you guys are such good debunkers? I'm this close, by the way, to asking for asylum. I'm sure you look down here south of you and go, what the actual hell is going on? I mean, do you have those thoughts?
I do. Well, Tim Caulfield and I both live in Alberta, and Alberta is affectionately known as the Texas of Canada. So we have a lot of very right-leaning, far right-leaning ideas. And so maybe I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, it's always good to watch your content. Honestly, I appreciate the depth of what you post and how rich it is with data, but I also appreciate your good humor, considering what people are throwing at you on an hour-by-hour basis. The fact that you can, keep the chin up, shoulders square, and keep kicking is pretty remarkable. So I remain a fan. I'm going to try to send everybody to go and pick up a copy of your book. And let's talk again down the road, okay?
I would love to, Seth. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you and your support.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.